Hello, and welcome to Coffee with Kathleen. Oh, whale. I'm so happy that you are joining today. I've recently been on a little bit of a tour doing some different talks under, at different shows under different circumstances. But one of the topics that's really resonating with these talks is helping people think about getting to the exec table specifically, not just growing their career, which we've talked about before, but getting to the exec table. And right now it appears less clear than ever how to do that because of course we've got AI, we've got job layoffs, we've got a lot of things that are kind of happening in the world, a lot of business uncertainty. The speed of business once again is moving faster than it ever has before. And so we're all kind of wondering, where does this leave us and what do we need to do? And in some ways, it is a little bit about executing on fundamentals that you maybe already know. It's about making small changes. But in other ways, it's really thinking through the value that you provide. And I have talked on a previous episode of this podcast, which if you haven't seen it, I recommend checking it out, about leadership in the age of AI. So check that out if you haven't already. It's available on demand. But outside of that, what do you need to do in order to be a productive executive in this time? And how can you think about bringing yourself to the executive table? So firstly, let's think about the executive table overall. So picturing who's at the table at your company, who's making decisions and at what levels. And at many companies, there are actually multiple levels of executives. There's kind of this inner sanctum C-level executive table. There's maybe an SVP executive table. There's maybe a vice president, an SVP executive table, et cetera. And so thinking about which table you're going to be at, how large the table is, and who's at the table ends up being pretty important because what you've got to figure out is the unique value and the unique voice that you can provide to that table. I personally believe that one of the useful things that you can do at an executive table is to represent a constituency. So certainly you are always representing your teams and your employees when you sit at one of those tables. And that's an important thing to do. But to the extent that you can represent a group of your customers or an industry or a market or a partner segment those things end up being pretty important as well, because now you're bringing in outside perspectives that maybe don't already exist at this table and that sometimes aren't very well represented. Companies get very internal. They get very navel-gazy is what I call it. That should be like a band name, navel-gazy. I'm not sure that I would like their music, but it should still be a band name. Anyhow. So I do believe in bringing market to the table. And I did a talk a few months back about how marketing could take a seat at the executive table. And when I had that conversation, I was like, the word market is literally in marketing. So if we as marketers are not representing our markets at the exec table, we're missing a big opportunity. But thinking about what external constituents can you represent? And then the second thing is, what real business problems are you in a position to solve? And how can you think cross-functionally about solving those? So I think that's particularly important because one of the ways that you leverage yourself into an executive role is by really being truly cross-functional and by leading cross-functional efforts and by showing multiple teams that don't report to you at the company what value you and or your team members can provide to that other team and making sure that those things are embedded. So pretty easy to do when you're in a servant organization, like a product org or a marketing organization. Business operations is another good one. Strategy organizations are another good one. All of these should sit across. But you can still do these things even if you're in finance, especially maybe if you're in finance. You can do this if you're in an engineering team. You can do this if you're in an IT team, certainly. There are very, very few teams, arguably, that don't have that reach or that ability to touch across multiple different teams at the company. And that broadening is absolutely imperative if you're going to sit at an executive table. It's not enough to be personally excellent. It's not enough to have amazing and incredible team members, which I have, and I'm very lucky to have them. However, thinking about how those people can integrate across multiple functions at a company, in a business unit, et cetera, are going to be very important to your eventual executive career, which I believe you're capable of. And I'm excited to help you with it. And then thinking about how you then embed yourself across multiple touch points into the way the business runs. Does not hurt in this day and age to be expert at various things. Someone I knew was an expert at emerging technologies. And so he would spend all of his time understanding what the latest and greatest were in various different business tools. He introduced me, for example, to Canva before I knew Canva was a thing. And now everybody's using Canva, and that's old hat, right? But he was on the forefront of that, of marketing and design tools when they were becoming easier. He was on the forefront of AI tools when those first started coming out. He was on the forefront of, different call center options, different chat options, et cetera. What is going to be your expertise? And some of that has got to include some of the business tools that are making, people's lives either in some cases harder or easier. They should correlate to your particular area of expertise. Being a technologist and really understanding what's going on in that space never hurts. And certainly people are more than happy to give you demos of their solutions. You can even use AI tools to help you to find what the latest tools are. You can make those demos very efficient. So you can spend 10, 15, 20 minutes getting these demos and make very good use of your time. And you can be honest with the salespeople who are giving you these demos and letting them know whether you're likely or not likely to use their solutions, so that you don't get bogged down in too much follow through. And they also don't get bogged down as well by the conversations that they're having with you, because they've got people they need to sell to. Another thing that I think it's really helpful to understand is to understand your market. And that's true whether you're in a job that requires you to understand it or not. And to understand the industry that you might find yourself seated in. How does your company define itself, and what should you know so that you can actively participate in that or represent, a particular vertical? Like we're at Repair Pal, we're a part of Yelp. And so I really feel it's more important than ever for me to be a part of the automotive industry so that I can make that translation inside of a much larger company that serves lots of different kinds of businesses. But in order for me to effectively ladder out, I also need to understand Yelp's business, and I need to understand other kinds of small businesses and how they're the same as or different from automotive. And so it's quite the task, and it's quite the challenge to commit to your own education, particularly when you're really busy. But arguably, you're never going to get to an exec table without doing that, no matter how great you are at your core job. And so if that's truly the goal, then you have to make time for that. So you have got to then be an effective delegator. And you've got to be good at giving work, not just to people on your own teams who are in your sort of direct reporting line, but you've got to be good at getting other people from other groups to also execute in a way that's supportive to you and your teams. And if you are good at that, and you figure that out, no matter how effective you are in an individual contributor role or how productive you may be as a human being, you are at some point going to hit a wall. I've done this many, many times. And when you hit that wall, sometimes it's very difficult with your back against that wall, particularly if you're working on aggressive deadlines and things like that, to get the help you need. So you need to start delegating and integrating when you're first thinking about even approaching the starting line. You can't do it when you're in the last mile of the race and you're, like I said, about to hit the wall. That's not really an effective time to think about it. You really need to think about it from the very beginning. And if you're not good at that, it's going to be really difficult for anybody to see their way forward. And delegating, by the way, it's an act of benevolence. If you are giving work that is meaningful, interesting, exciting, moving the business forward to colleagues, to people who work for you, etc., then you're doing them a favor. How else are they going to show their competency or what's next for them without having meaningful work to do? So I don't see it as this thing of like, oh, I'm giving away all of this stuff, and therefore, that's just for me, and it's very selfish of me because I'm just thinking of me. I'm also thinking about what work is going to be meaningful. So I'm not just putting it in a place where it's going to get done. I'm putting it in a place where it could potentially improve the outcomes, the career outcomes of the person I'm giving it to. So then it's a win-win for everyone. And I think about everything in terms of winning strategies. Why would I want to think about things where somebody wins and somebody loses? I don't think that's a requirement in business. I think there are outcomes where everybody can win. Ultimately, to get to an executive position, you also need to understand your financial drivers, and you've got to be connected to your numbers. And if you're not, or if you don't understand those well enough, or you don't come from an MBA background, I don't, and you need to take a class on it so that you can understand some of the terminologies and the conversations and things a little better, then do that. Take a class on it. It's not rocket science. There are a bunch of classes offered through, various college extensions, business programs, coaching platforms, etc. It doesn't have to cost you a whole lot of money. And there are plenty of forums and groups that you can also participate in or think about. But you've got to spend some amount of time making sure that you have a bare minimum business acumen across a number of different fronts. One of them obviously being leadership, but one of them also being, metric, numerical, financial acumen type tasks. And then once you've done that, you've got to connect your work to operational outcomes, to metric outcomes, and ultimately to financial or revenue or cost savings benefit for the company, or ideally both. And so that work being connected, then you've got to talk about it. So you connect the work to these outcomes, and then you need to proselytize about it. Again, oftentimes I'm talking to marketing teams, and one thing that I think marketing teams obviously should be good at this, but are not, is marketing internally their work. And so everybody needs to do this. Marketing internally your own work helps you. But it also helps the people on your team, because naturally you'll be pulling them forward and giving them credit for their work as well as part of these conversations. And then you'll be helping everyone to understand your business unit value as well as your own personal value. And that's key. It's not just about trumpeting your accomplishments all the time. It's about showing value in every interaction and then making sure that the value that you're showing in that interaction is clear. That's it. So you don't have to send out, big self-laudatory emails all of the time. It's really just about showing up and having a commitment to delivering value in every interaction. That is what I'm trying to do with you right now. I'm attempting to deliver value to you in terms of this conversation to help you think about how you up-level your career. I'm committed to it. And, most of my conversations sound like this. So in order to do this, you need clarity on where you create value. And then, of course, you need the confidence to show up that way. So I can't tell you in one, coffee cup sized podcast, all of the different things you might need to do at your particular company to get you to an exec seat. But I can get you started thinking about some of the things that you're going to need to do. One of those things is getting clarity on where you drive value. The other thing is the confidence piece that I mentioned. So how do you build confidence? Is it just people saying nice things to you? Actually, in fact, no, it's not. You gain confidence with experience. You gain confidence with accomplishment. So necessarily then you have to have accomplishments, which I promise you that you do. But you also have to recognize your own accomplishments for yourself so that you can start to understand, oh, yes, I do have experience in this area. Yes, I do have accomplishments in this area. Yes, I do understand what they are. And I am used to talking about them. And then once you get to that place where you're used to talking about them, you really get them, you really grok them, eventually what shows up is just bona fide confidence. So practice makes perfect, they say, but practice also leads to a place where you're so used to doing something that it becomes like second nature. And that's really what confidence is just putting your own self forward and knowing that when you do, it's going to turn out all right most of the time. And so, first things first, in order to get that experience, you've got to get yourself included. And so, you consistently need to offer things that are of value so that people want to include you. And you need to do it in a way that is culturally consistent with how your company operates so that other people feel supported and encouraged. You're amplifying the ideas, the other good ideas that you've heard. You're not taking credit for those. You're giving the credit where the credit belongs. But you're carrying these things into different rooms and you're making sure that you represent them and that you are creating spaces in your own teams and with your own people where those spaces are vibrant. They're lit up. People are sharing ideas. They feel included. They want to give their thoughts. And sometimes it's as simple as setting up operating mechanisms where people regularly do that. And sometimes you've got to set those up more than once. I've recently had to remind all of my teams, hey, I want to hear from everybody who's on the team at least once a quarter about what they're working on, what they're doing, and how that's going for them. And yes, that is a big thumbs up. Because if we're not creating those spaces and we're not doing those things, then people don't have the opportunity to talk to me. And then I'm poorer because I don't have those ideas on board. And other people aren't being given the opportunity to share those ideas. And the whole business ecosystem just doesn't work as well when that happens. So if you have been thinking about this for yourself, you might just say, well, all of this is kind of overwhelming, Kathleen. I don't know where to even get started. And I feel that. And so I feel like, there's a lot of wisdom out there. We've all heard, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And I do have a book. It's called Kaizen by Sarah Harvey. And, Kaizen is the Japanese concept of just taking small steps. So I'll just read you a little bit of this. Achieving happiness and fulfillment at work is possible, but not a guarantee. You can never fully control the people you have to interact with or what work problems might arise. What you can do, however, is create as pleasant an environment as possible and look after yourself both physically and emotionally to ensure that you are best placed to weather the inevitable storms that occur throughout the day. This is where Kaizen techniques can be transformative. Taking a step back to see what working habits don't serve you and trying out some new things to shake up your tired old routine can make a huge difference to your happiness levels during the day and to your work-life balance. Taking stock of how you feel about your career and the way it's progressing can be very illuminating and can perhaps highlight areas in which you are unhappy or prompt you to think about a career change. And so it is not about, sometimes it could be, but it's not necessarily about gigantic, big, huge leaps and changes unless you're really, truly ready to make those. But it is about taking small steps always forward. It's about taking inventory of where you're at across all of these things now. And then it's about committing to one or two small things. And then once you have checked those off, made those habitual, it's about taking on one or two more small things and so on and so forth, so that you are building yourself a ladder to the platform that you eventually want to be on. And you can do that one small habit, one small change, one conversation, one integration, one thing at a time. And that's what I am always thinking about for myself, is just what's the next right step with the information that I have on board and the things that I think and the person that I am, and just about taking that in every moment, and then about taking stock of how the last day, week, month, etc. went, and deciding what's one more thing that I could add to this that would make this even better. And that way, eventually, you will make your way to the executive table, and you won't do it because you scratched, clawed, fought, hammered, whatever the violent metaphors are, your way there. You will get there because you've made the table bigger, and you've created a seat for yourself because it's impossible not to include you in the conversation in order for the company to be successful. And that is how you will build your beautiful, illuminated, lit up career that serves not just yourself, but your customers, your market, your team, your partners, everybody who has the extreme privilege of interacting with you. And I hope that this little segment gave you a few ideas about how you can be you and how you can move you forward. Cheers.